Yeah, so we're going to talk today about 7 habits of highly effective enablement pros. Just quick housekeeping, we are recording this, so no need to take screenshots or take fastidious notes. You can always reference this back, and you can submit questions at any time, and we will come to those at the end. First off, wanted to get started just getting into a little bit of a life story to introduce our guest today. I'm just showing this background because it is one of the more fun things that we do at Guru is build these life story cards so that when whether we're in a meeting or somebody new has joined the company, we have kind of a sense of who they are before we go into that meeting, and it gives us kind of some things to talk about. And so I wanted to get into that with our speaker today, who is Michelle from Gong. How's it going, Michelle?
Good, good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's sort of build your life story card for the audience today.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a couple of quick hitters and then get into kind of your story and how you came to be here today.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start off.
Excellent. Okay, so first off, any nicknames?
I have 2 nicknames.
Okay.
One of them is kind of what they would call me in Europe, so it's niche.
Okay.
And so a lot of my foreign friends call me that. And the other one is Bird, which came from when I was a little kid. I was really, really skinny and tiny, and my parents would always call me Bird. So those are my really embarrassing nicknames.
Do they ever get combined? Miche
No,
Bird,
no,
or
no.
Bird Miche?
Definitely not.
Okay. And was the Miche coined in Europe? Were you traveling? Or?
Yeah, I backpacked Southeast Asia by myself for about a month.
Really?
Yeah, and so I met a ton of different people.
Which countries?
Vietnam and Bali.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And almost as warm as San Francisco today.
Absolutely. Pretty hot and really hot in this room.
No kidding, no kidding. If we start sweating, no comments, please. And where are you from? What's your hometown?
Actually, here. So I grew up in Redwood Shores. I am a native to the Bay Area. And right now I live in San Francisco. So pretty excited that I know everybody travels from all over to come and live here. And I was really lucky to grow up here.
Absolutely. Okay, well then as a local, I have to ask you, if you were stranded on a desert island and you can only get food from one restaurant in the city, or we can say the Bay Area.
The Bay Area, yeah.
In general, what would it be, and maybe what would the dish be?
Yeah. It'd probably be some sort of seafood, as that is my favorite thing to eat. But then I'm torn because I would say that it would be seafood, but most likely in the speciality of sushi.
I love sushi.
Yeah.
What is your favorite sushi place?
There's a spot right above, and it's Tokuba, which is right above John Collins. It's a bar down the street.
Yeah,
it has
I've been
this
there.
Secret sushi place right up
It's
top.
got a great vibe, yeah.
That I absolutely love, and I think it's just the best.
Okay, well, so if you're coming to San Francisco, Tokuba.
Yes, Tokuba.
Hit it up, and you can get some good drinks downstairs.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent. What's your favorite TV show or movie?
Okay, so here's the thing. I don't really watch movies.
Okay.
It's not really the thing I go and do. If I had to pick a favorite TV show, I'd probably pick something really funny, like Always Sunny, Family Guy.
Classics.
Yeah, things that are kind of Seinfeld.
Yes, of course.
100% would be one of them. It's really tough. I feel like when I get home after work, I don't really want to turn on something that's got a lot
intense.
of yeah.
And there's a lot of TV now that is.
I will say I love
intense.
Handmaid's Tale, a big fan of it,
Okay.
but even that is kind of a thing between my boyfriend and I around, okay, can I mentally get into it?
Get agreement on, we're going to commit to this for the evening. Yeah.
But movies, not so much.
Okay, all right, cool. Makes sense. A couple of recommendations there. All right, well, let's get into some of the more specific things about why we're here today. So you are the Director of Sales Enablement here at Gong, but
I am.
You weren't born as that.
Definitely not. No, I did not as a little kid think I just want to do sales enablement when I grow up. It's something I definitely fell into.
It's funny, one of my friends, Ryan Vanishi, who's the CMO of G2, did an interview recently, and I think he said when he was, 12 years old, he said, I want to be a CMO when I grow up. Which I don't think I heard any kids on the playground saying that.
I don't think so either. Yeah, it's pretty rare.
But we figured that stuff out. So yeah, we'd just kind of love to hear how you ended up here, what your sort of journey was as you got your career started. You can kind of start wherever you'd like, what you think is most applicable for the conversation today.
Yeah, it's funny because I think people ask me this all the time because my background is actually not super sales heavy. my background is mostly marketing and enablement. I've been doing enablement for over 10 years, and it's something that I truly fell into. I graduated from school with a degree in finance as well as wine. So
you're a Seawolf.
And I'm a Seawolf. I went to Sonoma up north, and I, obviously don't use either one of those today, other than as a casual wine drinker. And so I started my career. I worked at Jackson Family Wines, which is kind of, leveraging my degree in wine business. And it's a really old school, traditional type of industry. And it just moves so slowly. And when you're young, you're so ambitious and driven, and you
can't rush good wine.
You can't rush good wine. You don't rush good wine. But I really wanted to be in a place where there was a lot more innovation. And so I actually, being from this area, you hear all of the tech stories, you want to be part of that tech landscape. And so I actually moved, back towards the Bay Area, away from up in Sonoma, and got into kind of my first real marketing role, which was for this company called iTouchless that created houseware products that were all sensor based. So these are things like they're very common now, but they weren't back then, which is like soap dispensers that give you, soap, or my favorite was these toilet seats that would like automatically come up when you walked up to them. So
amazing.
I worked and traveled to do trade shows for them and their marketing, which eventually kind of spiraled into me jumping into sales enablement at my next role, which was Revision 3. And that company was purchased by Discovery Channel. So like I found myself, the next thing I knew, I was working at Discovery Channel. I was doing sales enablement there at a company that just had entire teams focused on this for $1 million budgets. And I just fell in love with it. I really, truly loved everything that I was doing and working with the sales folks and learning everything I could about sales.
How did that shift happen to go from marketing to on the sales enablement side? Was that an intentional choice? Or
I think it was something that just kind of happened. I was exploring a lot of different roles at that point, and my skill set really transferred because I was doing a bunch of sales oriented things at the housewares company, and then actually shifted over into really more sales specific when I took the role at Revision 3. And Revision 3 was like this cool, funky company that we were all just kind of like so classic startup, and then to go from that to this global organization like Discovery Channel, it was just a huge shift. But I definitely cut my teeth there for a good couple of years, and then shifted back into startup life, which is really where I live today, and I love so much. I'm a builder at heart, so going into startups, usually being the lone wolf, being the sole person, and then building it out and building an org for the organization to scale. So I've touched a couple different great startups along the way to now where I am here.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. Certainly, most of this presentation will be focusing on some of the work that you've been doing, but at a high level, kind of give us the Gong story and what attracted you to this company and what are some of the great opportunities that you've been able to take advantage of here?
So I pitched Gong on me coming on board. They never had a sales enablement role open. I specifically sought them out because we were using them at Lever, the previous company that I was at. And everybody was enamored with Gong, to the point where it was like, how do I invest in this company? Like, I know this company is going somewhere. How do I invest in it? And so I had actually reached out. I had already been working with the team in Israel to help them figure out what their library structure was like give input on the product. And I reached out to the CTO and I said, like, hey, I'm like just enamored with your product. Like, who can you put me in touch with? I'd love to just learn more and see if there's a fit. So I actually put on my SDR hat, pitched them on why they should hire me, and for this role that they did not have and were not thinking about, to come in and kind of build it out for them. So that was kind of my backstory on why I came to Gong, but really kind of reimagined a lot of the direction for
I love that.
Going.
Just taking the initiative, being proactive, saying, hey, this is a company that looks exciting to me. You don't have a role for me. Can you make one?
Absolutely. And I'll be honest, everyone that I told when I said, like, I'm going to Gong, they were like, yes, that's the move. You've got to go to Gong. And, there's a little bit of an element there too. Gong is, they're a sales they're a sales platform. They're a platform that helps people really get so much more out of their sales conversations. And I think that to me was really exciting, because I think a lot of times enablement works for companies that enablement is a function there at the company, but it's not the buyer persona. And here, it's one of the main buyer personas, on the pre-sale and the post-sale in terms of that budget. And so it's a little bit of a different place for me to be, because I now have a more customer-focused conversations as well as prospect conversations that I get to be a part of.
Working at a company where you actually are also a customer of the product is really an awesome thing to have.
And it means that I live and breathe inside our product every day. And I think when you're enablement, that's truly something that most enablement folks don't get. You're really trying to build something that you don't have a close connection to.
Do you guys all really refer to yourselves as gongsters?
We do. We refer to ourselves as gongsters. We absolutely do. We have lots of puns about it. We our team meeting is Genghis Gong. We've got,
I dig it.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Well, thank you for taking us through that awesome journey. Let's get into it then.
All right.
Well, let's start right at the top. I think it's interesting when you think about enablement, it has really become its own category. And as categories get created, as a marketer, I think of ABM. When I first heard about ABM, there was maybe one or two companies that had thought up one problem or one solution that they could really do well. And now you look at the ABM landscape, I don't know, dozens and dozens or hundreds of companies even have sprung up doing all kinds of different things under that umbrella. It feels like enablement is kind of the same thing. There are so many different functions that people with this skill set have been asked to take on at their companies. So I'd just love to hear kind of like, what do you think of when you hear enablement and join a company?
Yes, and it has changed over the years. If I'm being totally honest, it used to be sales assistants. That's what we used to be called. That's what I started out as back in the day.
Pretty good rebrand.
Yeah, like a really good rebrand. And so there was sales assistants, and they would kind of like build decks and help the salespeople out. And when the salespeople were out in the field, they would be fielding things back at the office and trying to get them quickly. And the transformation of enablement over the years has been incredibly exciting. We went from no one really knowing like what's the path of my career to, oh, this actually has a name. Oh, there's other people. And I really feel such like an affinity for the industry because of how it's evolved and the fact that companies are finally acknowledging that enablement is something that somebody should be solely focused on.
It's a strategic role.
It's a strategic role. Thank you. Yes. I think for many years it kind of sat in this tactical,
more of a reactive seat where
exactly.
Like you're getting asked to do something or provide something, find something.
It kind of fell into like one of three buckets or evolved into one of three buckets. And, the first one was enablement was not really a role. It was what salespeople did once they were really, really good at their role. Then they started doing things above and beyond. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, well, I know the team needs X. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to build that. And eventually, like, that's really, really grating on top performers. You want them to want to do that, but even managers, they don't have the time. So then it really shifted into like, okay, let's hire the one sole person that's going to come in here, and they're like, we're just going to give them, they're going to just do all this work.
Give them a whole pile of hats, put them on, and solve every problem.
And it won't be strategic at all. They're just going to do lots and lots and lots of tactical things. And what I'm really excited about, and what it's really starting to shift to, is it's starting to move into this very strategic position. People are recognizing that the perspective of enablement is unlike anything anywhere else in the company, because now you're starting to see how sales is talking to or operating with someone like, or a department like CS, or operating with a department like marketing, or how your SDR handoff is actually going over to sales. All of those different departments and all of what we would call here at Gong, your go-to-market departments. There's a lot of things happening in silos and a lot of work that's duplicated. So now we're moving over from this tactical, like, do you just build decks and pump content out and hope it gets
my
used?
prospect asks for this one thing, can you go get it?
Can you go get it? Can you build it? Can you, create knowledge? To something that is like, let's me actually weave these different conversations that are happening across multiple different leadership teams in the company to create a cohesive strategy on how we go out to market. And that to me is so exciting, but just something that I'm really passionate about. And I'm excited to see that kind of transition take place.
You talked a little bit about some of the silos, and even when we were preparing, I heard you speaking about enablement as its own term. I think the first time I heard about it, it was sales enablement.
Yes.
Very focused on the sellers, as you sort of talked about in your journey. It does really feel like now that model is being mirrored to other customer and prospect facing roles, and it's just going to become probably enablement for everybody. I mean, people.
It will 100% become either revenue enablement or go to market enablement. I think we're starting to even see the death of what is sales enablement. So if I look at even my own org, what I'm focused on is, yes, we have sales enablement. That's really important, but we're also building out CS enablement, our SDR enablement, our growth enablement. These are the big initiatives of the company, and each one of them is a different motion that we need to go out to market with. So instead of thinking about, okay, what is sales enablement, and they're the resource for sales, starting to really broaden the scope and think of it as a high-level strategic position that's actually going out and creating that go-to-market strategy for all of those different missions.
Consistency is a word that I think of with enablement, and especially as you talk about different teams needing to leverage some of the same assets and resources. Like, that experience is so important. Now, the standard for my interactions with the vendors that we use, the expectation is just higher. If I'm talking, no matter who I'm talking to, I want to have that same sort of relationship and same sort of experience that I'm accustomed to, and without a successful enablement strategy, it feels like that's going to be really difficult.
Yeah, so what we find happens when you don't have enablement, you've got the pre-sale side building and trying to take those new products to market, and then you have the CS side doing all of the same building, trying to take those products out to your base. And it's all the same things. They still want case studies. They still want use cases. They still want those wonderful stories that come through. And the reality is they shouldn't have to build all of that work and then build it again on the other side. So enablement can come in and say, okay, let's prepare all of these, knowing that we have a different audience for each. And that's really where the specialization comes in. Enablement has always been somebody that has to wear the hats and strategic hat of all of those various teams as one person, and that just becomes too chaotic. We're actually starting to see the development of what a good enablement org can look like versus just the one lone wolf.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about that lone wolf concept of coming in, and I think we've kind of made enablement sound really, really cool, really, really fun, really, really important, and it seems like it is all of those things. But there is the other side of it, is that it is still a fairly new function for a lot of organizations, and a lot of people like yourself are having to come in and build those from the ground up.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that is there's a lot of organizations, and I'm sure there's people listening to this who this might hit home with, which is there's a lot of organizations that don't get enablement. They don't empower it. They don't really understand the true value and what it can become. And so it leaves the enablement person really isolated. They're coming in, but they don't have a whole lot of power to do things. You've got maybe direct managers or frontline managers who have never worked with enablement, so they don't know what to ask for. They don't know what to expect. And enablement is trying to work maybe with executives to align and build out their dreams on what those new goals or initiatives are going to be. And it causes enablement person to play this role, which is like, how do I keep everyone happy? How do I get everything done? What do I do when all of my priorities are competing? And that's a very lonely place to be. I think there's multiple roles I've been in the past where I really thought, like, this might be it. Maybe enablement is just not going to be for me because I am grinding so hard. And it wasn't until I turned a corner and started interviewing for the person I wanted to work for, with a company that was aligned with what they thought, and agreed with what I thought enablement really should be, that I turned the corner and could become and build out a function that is really, really impactful. But I think it takes a while to figure out, like, what's your philosophy on enablement and how much are you going to be a driver and connecting with that executive team to get that alignment to ensure that you are empowered to be successful. Because otherwise, I call them my wounded doves. Because, you know, sometimes like I have a lot of friends in enablement, especially now. It used to be that I was not really big in the community. And when I found the community, it was like, oh, talk to me. How are you feeling? What, you know, like what's going on here? And the stories were all the same. Everybody was like, I've been kicked in the teeth. I don't know what to do. How do I turn the corner, or like, should I leave this altogether? And that to me, I realized is really sad. There's just a bunch of us that were kind of really down, and the work is so important. The work can be so exciting, and you've got all of these people with fantastic skill sets. And so much of the fact that enablement is coming into its own is an education that needs to happen with the VPs of sales, with COOs, you know, with the marketing departments around, okay, what is the strategy for enablement and how do we empower them to be successful?
Yeah, that impact is not well understood, and finding a way to highlight that. Yeah. Hopefully this conversation, you know, maybe will help some of the audience today do some of that. So let's get right into it. Let's jump into our 7 rabbits. Sorry, I had to. 7 habits of highly effective enablement pros. I'm just going to imagine that everyone's laughing at their computers at home.
I am.
All right, well, let's get into it. So the first habit is treat it like a team sport. As an athlete myself, I have always loved to find metaphors when I'm in meetings or making presentations that pull things to sports, because they are so, there are sort of frameworks in your mind of the coach role, the player role, just the different people involved. And I would love to hear kind of how you look at enablement in that way.
Yeah, so one of the biggest misconceptions that I come across with enablement is that companies and specifically frontline managers think like this person's going to come in, they're going to be a trainer. They're going to come in, they're going to do all of the training for them. Manager isn't going to have to do anything. And that's just not the reality. That's not what enablement is. Enablement is there to create the strategy and to empower managers and to give them the things that they need. And sometimes, yeah, you'll do trainings and you'll probably do a million other things as well. But it is a team sport, meaning that those become your business partners. And I think for a long time, enablement hasn't been seen as a business partner to the executive suite, as well as to those frontline managers. And really that's the play that enablement needs to make, which is you need to go to them and say, we are partners. How do we partner up to take care of this new training initiative that you have? Oftentimes, because there's only one enablement person, it's really difficult for them to go and then train the commercial team and the mid-market team and the SMB team and then maybe CS. Like it's a lot to do for one person, but if you could put together a strategy and empower those frontline managers who really, it means so much more to those teams if it comes from their manager, and it keeps their manager as an expert, which is also important. So that's really how I think about, when we think of enablement as a team sport, enablement is not here to come in and all of a sudden do all of these trainings and education and run your entire onboarding program. They're there to organize it and curate it and think about the strategy behind it, but then put the right players in place to actually deliver that content.
Is there any advice you would give someone who comes on in more of the siloed version of that, where they come in, maybe they didn't find a company that they wanted to and just reach out proactively, but they actually saw a posting that, hey, sales enablement, that sounds like something for me. They come on board. It feels like very naturally they just go, they're stuck in that little silo already from the start. Is there something that you did when you came on board, when you made that case, to say, hey, enablement is actually something that we need to be aligned on across all these things?
Yeah, I think it's a tough place, because naturally you want to shy away from having the tough conversation, but you have to be honest with yourself about, like, how do you feel about enablement? This is just one perspective for me, but how do you truly think about enablement, and what would be the strategy if you were going forward? And you have to align with your leaders, especially your direct manager. But that would be the tough conversation that I think has to happen, to level set on expectations. And I think oftentimes enablement people are just, they're just trying to meet the expectations of the person that they report to, and subsequently all of the people that they don't report to. when in reality, they need to be the ones setting the expectations about what they're going to deliver and find some middle ground there.
How is this going to work, and what do I need from
Absolutely.
the rest of you, and what are you going to expect to get from me, and what do you need from me?
Exactly, and really make it a partnership rather than just constantly serving up content.
Definitely. Starting to see some questions come through. Please keep sending those. And we're going to move on to our next habit, which is to establish structure, which we kind of got sort of dipped our toe into, and stick to it.
Yeah.
Which is probably the hard part.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the empowerment piece.
So what are some of the pieces to that structure, maybe the keystone blocks as you have built the foundation for that here at home?
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple ways to think about structure. Do you want to tackle it from a place of, what are the blocks that enablement really takes on? Or you want to talk about it from like building a team?
Is there
third option?
Is there one of those two options that, someone coming in or just getting started in a new function, you think is a better place to start?
Perfect. Okay, so if we're thinking about building a structure because you're brand new and you come in and all of a sudden you've got tons of work and you don't know where to start. The thing that I always think about is, first of all, you need to have something probably like conversation intelligence, because you'll need to have a way to get data. Most times enablement wants to start with an LMS, and I think that's really tough. So if you're interested in starting with an LMS, the only way to make an LMS successful is to actually have all of that content ready to go to put into the LMS. That's where things kind of get a little bit sticky. With conversation intelligence, then you could at least have lots of great calls that you can put into, you can have something to build that content around. So usually I say, you need something like that, then you would need an LMS. I'm a big proponent of LMSs, and even ask my team. I really try hard not to use an LMS for ongoing training for the reps that have been here a long time. It's usually just an onboarding. So I try and stick pretty heavily to that. Reps don't like it. They just don't enjoy learning that way. I mean, reps want to be engaged. They like in-person things, and I know that's not always possible, but for the most part, when somebody is brand new to the company, that's when they're most excited. That's when they're most willing to learn. That's when they're like, you drop them, a 50-page book on their desk and they're gonna get after it. But once they jump the chasm, start closing deals, their time becomes really, really precious and expensive to the company as well. So you have to be thinking about what's the most effective way to deliver content to them. So a big proponent of LMS being for the onboarding program to make that as scalable as possible, and then really relying on the structure of the team and managers, right? Because we're a team, this whole thing is a team, to deliver that content in a way that is engaging outside of an LMS.
And if I'm going to make, and this may be a reach, but a sports metaphor out of that, sure. It's almost like when you get a new player on the team, you hand them the playbook and say, memorize this. You need to know how to use these plays when you make the calls. And then once they're already having an impact, they're on the field. Obviously, you're not going to run on, when they've got 20 seconds to call a play and say, here's the playbook.
Like,
you're coaching. You're doing more in the moment.
You're coaching. You're creating scenarios. You're doing role plays. You're practicing, right? Like that's the way that people learn most effectively, especially someone like a salesperson or even a CSM. Or SDR, like they just need that practice. So that's something that I tend to focus on.
So you're defining the onboarding, you're defining the experience as they progress in their careers. You've supported that with some tools.
Yeah.
Other pieces to the structure, or those that's the toolkit?
There's multiple pieces. The onboarding is a huge piece because you've got to get people up and running, and ramp time is always something that enablement tends to be held to. Then you've got the ongoing training and education piece, and that's the reinforcement, which really tough to stay on top of unless you have that team mentality. And then that third piece is really the knowledge management, because enablement then starts to notice about all the tribal knowledge, right? Anytime you're trying to build something, even if it's a lesson in an LMS, you realize, oh yeah, my reps are the experts in this. So then you're going and interviewing them, and you're realizing that there's 6 ways that they're tackling this one problem. And so that naturally falls on enablement to figure out, well, how do we bring all of this together? And I think where people really misstep is knowledge management is difficult in that if you don't have an owner, no one wants to take ownership of it. And I definitely recommend to all enablement folks out there, if you can get your hands on it, be the owner of it, it goes a huge way. I mean, you become kind of the oracle then that everybody else comes to, because, and you naturally build value that way because you're seen as the person that has all of the knowledge. And then you can actually make sure that it is streamlined and position yourself strategically within the company to not just support something like sales. Knowledge is something that has to go across the entire company. And so that's something, we use obviously Guru, but I made a very, strict decision when I spoke with my own executive team here that this couldn't be something that was just for the sales team. Like it's going to be too much to own and work if I was only going to build it for the sales team. And therefore I took ownership of the entire go-to-market teams. And it has actually spread.
Was that a hard conversation to have?
It was a hard conversation. I'll be honest. It took 3 or 4 hours worth of conversations of like, how do we want to try and solve this problem and to expand it without understanding how it's going to be adopted, right? Sales teams are different than CS teams, which are different than marketing, which is different than facilities. By being able to bring all of that content together, whether it's what the address is here or our Wi-Fi password or what is our play to go out and cold call, having all of that in one place has actually been phenomenal. And it's why I think it's so important that you don't focus and just build in one silo.
It's interesting. You talk about you've been on the last the team source part about, or even actually I think it was in the enablement. What is enablement component? About sort of your data-driven approach is actually you don't want to lead with just, hey, we need a tool to focus on delivery and distribution. We need to fill that with something. We need to be able to capture some of the feedback and the insights, which you just described like a tool set basically that does that for you so that you can have this structure and support the team that you've established.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another aspect of the team sport that's really important, right? Like I can't be knowing of everything. I do have to lean on others. But what I find is when you have a good system that everyone is participating in, they're actually going through the content more consistently to flag when something is outdated, rather than that onus being on enablement to constantly keep everything updated.
That feels like a pretty distinct threshold when you can start to activate your players on the field to also become coaches on the field.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, let's talk about, we talked about some planning, some strategic thinking, but when you actually identify those gaps, making things actually happen, showing impact, how do you do that?
So we're doing that right now because we just rolled out Sandler training. So as you know, any methodology is a huge investment, pretty heavy lift for enablement to do, and something that I really focused on, which is out of the norm, was instead of just doing, normally when you roll out a methodology, it's like a 2-day, maybe 2 or 3 day full immersive workshop that, it more or less is effective, right? People are excited because they're getting the training and education.
They're away from their desks, they get to focus on something.
Right, exactly. They're maybe vacationers, right? So they're just so excited
there's food, there's drinks.
Exactly. They're like, oh, I don't have to do my day-to-day. So they're like hanging out. That's great. But I actually think, and what we decided to do here was break that into 4 different sessions over 4 different months. So instead of trying to get all that content into 2 days or 3 days, breaking it out into smaller, 4 to 5 hour sessions over 4 months was really, really key. And that helped us do a couple of things. We still covered quite a few topics in each 4 or 5 hour session, but what was really important is we aligned with our revenue leadership team on picking one most important piece that we would then reinforce from the end of that training until our next one. So for Sandler, we did an entire month of only upfront contracts. And that was it. That's all we focused on. We had tons of role plays. We did a huge spiff. We recorded all the calls and tracked all of the stuff in Gong. And then I could actually have the data on what was it like before the initiative, and then what did it look and sound like after the initiative. And then we go and head into our next kind of session and pick the next important piece.
Yeah, that reinforcement. And I think as a marketer, I think of some parallels where when we write copy and put it on a page, it's tempting to just, hey, here's everything. Here's the whole story. Here's a commercial about what we do and why you should want to use our product or try our service or work with us. But actually, how people learn and how they understand things is not that way. You need to actually, on the market side, earn that trust, but actually account for the way that people consume information. It's very unlikely that if you put 1,000 words in front of someone, they're going to remember it all.
Absolutely.
And so identifying what are those key pieces of content or those key actions that you want them to take and enabling them just to focus and making it unavoidable. It's like if you spent all that time on this one piece that you want people to do, how could you possibly forget coming away when it was just that one piece?
When it was just that one piece. And actually what we realized is as we started to get into the reinforcement sessions, there was a group of people that really got it right off the gate. Easy. They're already putting it into motion. And then there were kind of these holdouts. There are these people that were like, it's just, I'm like having trouble really understanding the why. So then we spent a lot more time being like, okay, let's actually get those people over the hump of that why. And then we can continue on with the reinforcement. And I think you miss that if you just expect it all to kind of come together in a 2 or 3 day workshop deep dive, because they're not able to take that away. And the learning styles are so different. This gives managers the ability to see like, okay, this initiative came from the top. It is now on us to take out to market. Can we actually see a difference? And can we coach to it? And it's too hard to coach on 20 different things. So creating specificity, something like that, to have that sole focus makes a huge difference. So I think when it comes to identifying the gaps, it's identifying the gaps, but it's not being overzealous in picking everything to try and fill.
The focus, definitely a big theme here. And as we go into the next habit, you've talked a lot about managing through managers.
Yes,
and really taking advantage of the elements of scale that the other leaders of the different teams can provide to you. That's not an easy thing to do. Probably, I would guess one of the hardest parts of your job is to get that buy-in and alignment and adoption from those other leaders. How do you stay aligned with your exec team? Because my sense is you sort of indicated that is an important piece to be able to do that.
Yes. And I might say something a little controversial, but I think if you're an enablement person and you don't have a seat at the table, it's not a good sign. And what I mean by that is in order to stay aligned, they need to see you as a strategic partner. They need to value your voice. You need to be, you don't have to be in the C-suite, obviously, but you do need to have a seat at your revenue leadership table if you're leading the team. And you need to have a presence there because all of the other strategies have elements of enablement that are part of them. And otherwise you are being handed work to go and do with expectations that are being placed upon you versus the other way around, which is here's what I can deliver. Here's what do you guys think, having the collaborative conversation. So I think having a seat at the table, asking for a seat at the table, making the case for you to have a seat at that table will make a huge difference in staying aligned. But also maybe just having a conversation with some of the people on your executive team one-on-one to get and do a little bit of an informative interview on how do they view enablement. I think we have a lot of assumptions as enablement folks of like,
but as we talked about, it could mean anything.
It could mean anything. Yeah. It really truly can. And what you might find is that different executives have different ideas. So making that alignment with them and helping them understand kind of what your philosophy is might actually be the thing that changes their perception. They just might not know and are just filling it based off their years of working with enablement in the past. And as we know, it's changed so much over the last 5 years. So it's not necessarily their fault.
Are there any frameworks or even just like strategies that you've used to maintain that? Like whether it's a quarterly update meeting or it's actually like weekly, we have a section in every meeting. Just curious if there's anything that tactical that people can take away. Because I think we talked about sort of the high level strategy and the importance of it, but how do you make that real?
The way that I tend to tie it is the executive leadership always has all these initiatives, right? They have their goals that they want the rest of the company to buy into. And the way that I position it to them is enablement is your conduit to actually get those adopted and to see real behavior change. So it is important to have that partnership. And I usually do it in one-on-one meetings. I do it in the revenue leadership meeting or our CS post-sale leadership meeting to garner that, but also to have conversations when I'm building for example, onboarding that crosses the entire organization. So that's something that everyone has to be involved in. Your executive team is just one element of your stakeholders. You also have your frontline managers. You also have the reps or the CSMs or the support people. Those are, it's almost like every single person in the company becomes a stakeholder. And you just have to.
What a great segue, by the way.
Is it?
Go to the next one. We're talking about defining enablement for all functions and really what that means to each of these people, because it is going to be different.
It is going to be different. So in order to stay aligned, you really need to understand kind of what are they excited about, what are their perceptions of enablement, and help drive that narrative early and often to plant the seed on what you're there to accomplish.
So I think the theme, if I could, of the first 5 feels like a little bit of that. You have to go slow to go fast. You really need to take the time to develop the strategy, evangelize the strategy, get buy-in and alignment on it before you can really do some of what the ongoing work of enablement is going to be.
Yeah, I think that that's really key. So much of what an enablement person comes in to do, like enablement people, we're doers, right? We're people that want to get things done. We love checklists. We love to pump out a bunch of work, and that's what makes us really good at what we do. But there's actually this other skill set that we really have to hone in on, and that's the piece of, okay, how do I set myself up for success in the long run? That's having those difficult conversations. That's defining it for yourself. All of the things that we've talked about over the last couple of habits, because I think we miss that step. And then the next thing you know, we have 18 million priorities. We've got too many hours of work for one work day. And everybody starts to get mad at us because the expectations are a little bit.
Puts you back in that reactive mode.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Makes sense. All right, well, let's talk about some of that work. And definitely one of the foundational pieces is to, as you said earlier, intensely and robustly onboard new folks.
Yeah, so to me, this is the one I'm really passionate about. And the reason why intensely is there is because I think onboarding should be very, very intense. Onboarding is what I like to call the second gate out of 3 gates on how you help identify whether or not somebody is a good hire. A lot of us work in startups, but even if you don't work in startups, most of us are not experts at interviewing. So the first gate is the interview process. Oftentimes it's like hiring managers and maybe some reps or some CSMs or whoever is in that interviewing panel, and they're not expert interviewers. So naturally some people are going to come through that interview process that maybe aren't a good fit. And when you make your onboarding program really intense and heavy, and remember, people are excited because they're interested in learning, it allows you to quickly identify who's probably going to make it and who's not. And that's going to save your company a ton of money, right? That's the piece that is really important to align with your executive team of like, hey, obviously you want people to be successful, but you have to put the dots actually a little bit further apart than what enablement is used to. Oftentimes we just want to give a new person everything, but we actually can't do that. We have to give them 70, 80% of that and then say like, okay, how's it going? Getting to that 100%. That's how we identify who's going to stretch themselves, who's going to really push themselves, who's going to be resourceful when push comes to shove.
So you said that you're going to find people who aren't right away in onboarding if you sort of take it, up level it, and make it that intense.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just because you've identified somebody doesn't mean that they're a bad hire. It just means that like, hey, maybe they're not participating in your sessions. Maybe they're not very engaged. Maybe they're not doing the assignments or the homework. And those are all indicative things of like, okay, maybe they're really introverted and shy, or maybe they don't really care and they're just showing up, or maybe there's a huge gap in what they know. Maybe they come from a different industry and they're just trying to like get the terminology down and they're starting to fall behind. So the way that we think about it is we will flag people in onboarding, and then the managers, the third gate of this is actually the mentorship and manager portion where they're working directly with this person. And so we'll both come to the table and say, okay, you have your flags, I have my flags, almost like a game of war, like flip them over at the exact same time. And let's talk about it. What have you been seeing? What have I been seeing? And sometimes it's like, oh, that person, they've got some stuff going on in their family life, and that's why they've been in and out of sessions. Or, yeah, this person just hasn't shown up and isn't completing any of the assignments, even though the manager also asked them to. That would be a red flag. So it's not to put an X on anybody. It's to just say, hey, manager, you might want to give this person a little bit more extra attention once they leave onboarding, because we didn't think that they were able to get everything out of onboarding that we were hoping for. So through those 3 gates, we start to see, you know, a more strategic role for enablement to play. And what I mean by that is now you're not just looking at, okay, you're identifying somebody as good or bad, but you can actually go back to the hiring profile and influence what type of people you're bringing in. You can identify who those really amazing rock stars are and create that hiring profile for the future.
So going back to building those feedback loops so that you're capturing the data that you're capturing through, you know, processes across the org.
Exactly. And if your onboarding program is too easy, you'll never be able to understand whether or not you're hiring good or bad people.
Essentially, it feels like as you talk through some of the different functions you have and the way that you think about it, that you are really that sort of centralized brain, but not just the brain of the org and that people are coming to you for knowledge, but the memory. It's the memory of the org. It's when we hired people like this, how successful were they? And I can now use that because I'm remembering that to make better decisions. And so finding ways to create those loops.
Those loops, and also it's a different perspective. So the manager is seeing it from one point of view, and enablement is seeing it from kind of maybe this more holistic and third party.
You have more to compare against.
More to compare it against.
Everyone who's onboarded
versus
everyone just on my team who's been on.
Exactly. So that to me is another great way for enablement to think about themselves as a strategic partner to the recruiting team, to the managers, so that you're bringing in awesome people. And yes, you're there to help onboard them and reduce that ramp time, but you're not doing it from just a tactical seat. That's a really important distinction.
I want to talk a little bit about measuring this. You
obviously
are very results oriented. This is a difficult thing to measure in a lot of orgs. Of course, the impact that enablement has, because in a lot of ways it has, well, we talked about the history of it being sort of a supportive shared service, and now switching into a more strategic role. It's still sort of behind the scenes.
It is.
So how do you measure, how do you know if someone is a good coach, or how do you know if the programs that you're putting into place are working well, or if there's things to be improved?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, until I had Gong, it was kind of just like, check the wind, see, and I think marketing went through this whole thing. Before there was Marketo, before there was Cardup, before there was all of these amazing, it's like, it was just kind of like, oh, marketing, they just spend money. And I think enablement is coming into their heyday of like, we don't just spend money, or we don't just put out a bunch of work of, we're non-quota bearing, right? So therefore we, our contributions should be different per se. So the way that I think about measurement, it depends on what stage of the company that you're in. If you are at a really robust company, then you'll probably have a lot of the things in place to do some of that measurement. You'll probably have ramp time. You'll have maybe a good, well, I don't know if anybody has a good Salesforce instance that has good data, but you know, you might have more data points that you could then collect to understand where people are in that structure. But I would also say that something like Gong, where you can track your initiatives, so you put in trackers of words that people are saying, because we all have scripts, we all have things that we want people to go out, and they don't always have to stick to it, but they at least got to start there. Yeah. So typically when I think about measuring my outputs, I go to my executive team. I gain alignment on what do they want to, what are their goals? And then I plan out what are the enablement things that are going to support those goals and what are those initiatives. And then I actually build them into Gong and build out those reinforcement programs. So by the end, you know, I can look at the stats and say, like, this is what the trend is. I can break it down by person. I can see who's coaching and who's giving feedback, who's not. That's pretty incredible for the direction that we're going. And even something like Guru, it's like, I can see what the adoption is. I know who's using cards and who isn't. So when people are putting on Slack tons of questions, and I can go in and say, like, okay, you're not checking any of these Guru cards, that's a moment that I can go to their manager and know that they're not being proactive in what we're actually providing them. And it's not to say that enablement's not doing work, or, you know, trying to put an exact number on enablement. It's like enablement needs to take some they need to put some of that accountability back on frontline managers where they haven't had a chance to do that prior. So you're seeing a lot of these enablement tools, even the LMSs are coming in and they're giving that power back to enablement to say, hey, not a blame game. It's here are the facts. And I think Enable just hasn't
and
had
here's
the
our
facts.
strategy.
And here's our strategy.
Following it, or are we venturing off and getting lost?
And if you're playing as a team, then those managers will take some ownership of what they're actually responsible in that reinforcement program. And then I always add, if you're a startup and you're being asked to be measured on a bunch of things, I think it's a little bit tough because most often you're one person and you're trying to go from 0 to 1. Yeah. And 0 to 1 is really, really, that's everything. You know, it's like you just want to get something there. Once you get into versions 3 through 10 or what have you, then you can really start to dig into those numbers. But for people that are in small startups, I would just recommend not worrying too much about the numbers, focusing mostly on like, can you just get something in place?
Okay, great. Well, let's recap these habits. So right there, treat it like a team sport, establish structure and stick to it, identify gaps and put things into motion. Staying aligned with the executive team, that one felt like it was
throughout all of them. It's the most important one. Yeah.
Defining enablement for all functions, so really making sure that you set expectations with everyone as to what your purpose is.
And in that is focusing on an enablement strategy for those functions. Ideally, hiring a headcount for those functions. It's not one person trying to do everything.
Yeah, right. You wouldn't have a product marketer marketing 20 products.
Yeah,
they've got to be able to specialize and really maximize. And then, of course, intensely and robustly onboarding new folks and measuring your outputs.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we do have a bunch of questions that have come in, but I wanted to make sure we switch to this GIF first. All right, well then maybe we can lightning round some of these. I know it looks like we've got about 8 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we cover as many as we can, but if we don't cover them, we'll follow up either like in a blog post or even directly if you had a question for that.
Sure.
All right, well let's jump right in. How do you get buy-in for further enablement when teams are already performing at a high level?
If your teams are performing at a high level.
My sales team is the best. What could you possibly do for us? Why would you deserve headcount?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always going to be a ton more work that enablement is tasked with that they can actually do. So I think it's more of a prioritization around like, what are all the foundational pieces that we're working on today or would love to have in place? And then what is that next level up? And then that next level up that you would aspire to be able to get done. And I think that gap is decently wide in what enablement would love to do versus what they actually can because they're just kind of stuck in the weeds. So I think it is a conversation around that executive team alignment of, hey, CRO or hey, COO, you know, what are your goals for the next quarter, the next year? And then planning with them of like, what are those big initiatives and what is that headcount? I think the easiest way when you talk about teams being at a high performing level is that specialization, whether it's, you know, an enablement person that's solely focused on the because they're always going to want to be incrementally better.
I often hear, and I would guess this is one of those cliches that permeates every organization, I wish I could clone my best insert.
Absolutely.
Here. It kind of feels like that's what enablement is meant to do, is to take what is so great, the elements of what's making somebody really successful on a team, and find a way to do that for everybody on that team. So no matter how highly your team is performing, there's always
there's no ceiling. And the reality is if your team is performing that well, it's going to be growing. So then you're going to need to figure out what that scale strategy is, and things break once you try and scale, right? So it's like you've really got to be thoughtful about building a strong foundation in order to make it scale.
We got a question about tools. So this person said that they struggle with getting solution engineers to adopt a content management system. Any pointers on how to get them more on board? Is it just that they don't see value in the content on the platform? And I might even add an editorial part to the question, which is, how do you know which tools are right for which purposes? Because a lot of tools, as we talked about, enablement as it's really exploded, a lot of these tools have kind of gone in and said, I am the tool for enablement, as opposed to I'm here to solve one part of your, or, you know, one or a few parts of the challenges that you have.
Yeah, whoever sent in this question, come talk to me and like find me on LinkedIn or something. I'd love to just chat with you because I like feel so excited about this question. And I'm a little torn on the answer. And the reason why is because solution engineers tend to think a little bit differently than I think most go-to-market teams. And the way that I feel about any sort of content management or knowledge management system is that getting people to adopt it is kind of like the pipe dream. It's kind of like the end goal that we all really strive for. But I don't want to say it doesn't happen. It takes a lot of curation and ownership on enablement first to then get somebody else to see the value. If it isn't built out all the way by enablement first, and I mean like 90% the way there, it's really hard for others to create that, or it's really hard for others to experience that magic moment. And that magic moment comes from when they're looking for something and they find it, and it solidifies the habit of like, oh, okay, I got what I came here to do. And that's a little bit tough. If you're talking about it from the perspective of that creating content, that's a conversation you have to have with them. But ideally, even myself, if I can't get a team to create the content, I then go become the expert and create the content myself. And I know that that is painful and it's a lot more heavy lifting. But the reality is you'll end up being that person anyway. So you might as well just take ownership, get a pint of ice cream, like down it at 11 p.m. at night, and like bang out that content because your company needs it. You're going to need it. And when it comes to really that adoption of getting people to use it, it's got to be quality content. And so that would be my last part, which is try and make that content as quality as possible.
It's kind of like you're trying to get somebody to try a new food, and then it sounds like the question is make sure that food is fully cooked.
Right. Make sure that that food is at its best. For sure. And if I misinterpreted your question, I'd love to talk more about it because I actually think the adoption piece, a lot of people miss it.
You talked about how beneficial and maybe therapeutic the engaging with other people in your role in the general community has been. This person asked if there's a group that you recommend joining, but I would broaden that. Just are there ways or tactics that you that have worked well for you to find other like people?
Yeah, so it depends on where you live. If you're here in the Bay Area, the Modern Sales Professionals group is really, really strong, and I highly recommend it. If you're elsewhere, I would look into the Sales Enablement Society. That's also somebody or an organization that's relatively bougie. It is. It's so bougie. It's great. There's a lot of thought leaders in enablement space that are focused on putting out enablement. But to be honest, the best thing that I have found is anytime that you see somebody posting on LinkedIn about enablement is to actually go in, say hello, ask them for 30 minutes of their time, and just get on a video chat with them and connect with them. Talk about what the struggles you are facing, ask them what the struggles they're facing. I've found that to be the most helpful, and now I have this weird, crazy network across lots of different states of awesome enablement folks. And I know that feels a little bit like curating your own, but you'll be surprised the amount of kind of like wounded doves and also awesome kick-ass enablement people that are out there across the country.
It can definitely feel like there's a bit of a barrier to just cold reaching out to someone and saying, hey,
we're so friendly. Enablement folks are so friendly, and they will be so excited to hear from somebody else who wants to talk about their craft.
People will say yes.
People will say yes. I will say yes.
The good ones, because they care. Because they care. They want to not just find ways for themselves to do smarter and better things, but help others do it too, and really establish.
And the industry is still so young. So much of this is us teaching ourselves and sharing the knowledge across those of us who've maybe a little bit more experience. But so much of it is like, you've got to just curate it.
And it's ever changing.
And it's ever changing, yeah. Absolutely.
It's always new strategies that are coming up.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're right here at the top of the hour. I want to make sure that we share our contact info. So I do have your LinkedIn up there for anyone who's looking to reach out, and the website right there as well. If you want to connect to us, we would definitely enjoy that.
Please.
We've got a few questions we didn't answer. Like I said, we'll get back to those. Maybe we'll do another talk show or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
But otherwise, thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Appreciate it. I hope you guys had fun.
All right. Have a good one.